Mr. President, I come to the floor today to talk about what I believe is a real crisis at the southern border. And I think there's even a case to be made that we have challenges at the northern border, but I want to focus on what the narrative here in the country has been over the past couple of months, weeks, or really years since I've been here sworn in 2015. I think it's very important. We all know that we have the executive order from the president or the emergency declaration where he clearly believes that there is a crisis at the border, so much so that he was willing to invoke a law that Congress granted, authority that Congress granted him back in beginning in 1976, the National Emergencies Act, and then amend it through the 1980s. He believes that he's within his authority to declare an emergency so that he can get resources down to the southern border as quickly as possible. It's no secret that I disagree with the method that the president is using to provide funding down to the southern border. But make no mistake about it, I do believe that there is a crisis at the border. And I take exception to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who say that the president is manufacturing a crisis. Yesterday, I serve on the Judiciary Committee. I have since 2015. Yesterday, we got a briefing from Homeland Security that was truly startling in terms of the statistics of the number of crossings, record numbers of crossings, several-fold, in one case 10 times over the past few months. And I believe that some of the reason why we're seeing the increase in illegal crossings is because those who are coming from countries other than Mexico, which are the majority of illegal crossings today, believe that if you get across the border, there's a very low chance that you will be returned to your country of origin. Now, the Speaker Pelosi, said it's a manufactured crisis. It's not a manufactured crisis. Take a look at the data. It's a real crisis. We had the majority leaders say the same thing. Now, I think it's a crisis on several levels. One just has to do with the number of people coming across the border today. And there was something that was very important that I think was missed by many people in the committee hearing yesterday. There were a number of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who I work with. And in fact, I worked with Senator Durbin on a solution for the DACA population. I'm not necessarily considered a hawk on all things immigration. But I will tell you, when I hear the senior senator from Illinois say that everyone who's coming across the border are fleeing a dangerous situation in their country of origin, that doesn't necessarily reconcile with the fact that almost 80%, 8 out of 10 claims of asylum are adjudicated not to be valid. 8 out of 10 claims for asylum are adjudicated not to be valid. And I don't hear anybody on the other side of the aisle saying that we should change the standard for an asylum claim. So for someone to say that everyone coming from these countries are fleeing a fear of some sort of harm by staying in their country or maybe staying in Mexico while they sort things out, it's simply not true. If you take a look at the several-fold increase in illegal crossings, 80% of them are deemed invalid in terms of a threat of life or liberty from their country of origin, based on our standard for asylum. Not me making it up. That's a matter of court records being adjudicated by officials who were appointed by Democrats and Republicans. So it's not like we have someone down there setting a different standard for asylum. 8 out of 10 asylum claims for people crossing the southern border are deemed invalid. But now what's happening is we're spending so much time adjudicating, detaining, and processing this influx of illegal crossings that we're creating a more dangerous situation because bad actors are getting through. Our resources are being spent trying to process this influx of crossings that we've got to stop. And how do you stop it? You stop it by preventing future flows. You stop it by changing the treatment of a family who crosses from Mexico being different from a family who crosses from Ecuador, El Salvador, or any other southern or any other Latin American country. You treat them all the same. You treat them respectfully, You try to give them an opportunity to make their case, but you also send the clear message: if you can't come through the normal asylum process, which means you show up and you lawfully request your asylum claim is heard, then you cross the border and you put yourself and you put your children at risk. We have a crisis at the border. I spent a week, in fact, Senator Cornyn speaking after me, Senator Cornyn invited some of us to spend a week down on the southern border. And it was very revealing to see what's going on there, seeing crossings happen right before us, seeing cane along the Rio Grande River that prevents border security from even seeing somebody who may be 10 feet away as they're snaking through in the middle of the night. We were on horseback, we were on low draft boats, we were in helicopters. We saw the crisis at the border in real time. That was last year. Now we have several fold more people coming across the border. Now, the crisis has several layers to it. One of the ones that I think every American should get behind is the crisis that's occurring because our resources are being diluted by taking care and trying to police these borders and apprehending people, 8 out of 10, who will ultimately be deemed not to have a valid asylum claim. While we're tracking them down, the cartels are smuggling millions of doses of poison across our border that are killing people every year. These are the deaths that have been reported, and they're reported, sadly, almost on an annual basis, tens of thousands of people dying as a result of drugs coming across the southern border. Because our resources are spread so thin, I think this will get worse if we don't figure out how to secure the border. We have deaths of immigrant crossings. You know, that every year on American soil, we recover nearly 300 bodies of people who paid hundreds or thousands of dollars to the cartels so that they can pass through the plazas at the southern border. There is no way you cross the southern border without paying a fee to these organized crime gangs who literally control the border. In fact, we were told yesterday in the committee that it'll cost you $500 to put your foot in the Rio Grande River, and if you don't, you're probably going to die before you ever leave Mexico. We have no earthly idea the thousands of people, men, women, and children, who die trying to cross the border and can't pay a toll at the appropriate time, or they get caught up in a conflict between the cartels along the plazas at the southern border. But I know thousands of people have died. Over the last 20 years, nearly 10,000 bodies have been recovered on American soil, men, women, and children, because this has become one of the most profitable enterprises for the human smugglers, the human traffickers, and the drug traffickers in Mexico. That's a crisis, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a crisis that we need to recognize. Gang members, thousands of MS-13 gang members have crossed the border illegally, and here's the sad reality when they successfully cross the border. They go into Hispanic communities. They go into communities, many of them, communities where the majority are legally present, and make them more dangerous. They hide there, they co-opt them, they actually recruit kids into their gang activities and use minors to do a lot of the illegal activities, distributing drugs, trafficking humans, and all the other illicit activities that the gangs are involved in. That's a crisis. The human toll is devastating. When we were down at the border, we were told of one massacre. This is one instance where a coyote, that's the person who is responsible for moving people through the plazas, ultimately to cross the border illegally. In one instance, we had this human trafficker, this smuggler, human smuggler, who apparently used a lot of the money that should have been passed back to the cartels to pay for the passage of these folks who were trying to get across the border, and he didn't have the money to pay the cartel. So what did the cartel do? Ordered the massacre of 72 people. This is one group of 72 people on the other side of the border that were murdered. Men, women, and children. They never got to the United States. And the sad fact is, statistically speaking, if they had, after they spent virtually all of their life's belongings, if they had gotten across the border, 8 out of 10 of them probably wouldn't have a valid claim to asylum. We've got to figure out a better way to help these countries where these folks want to come to the United States and enjoy our liberties, enjoy our economic blessings. Crossing the border illegally is not the way to do it. So that's why I have consistently supported any measure to secure the border. There's no recommendation that President Trump has made that I haven't supported. I supported the package last year that was nearly $25 billion for people, technology, and infrastructure to secure the border. It's to build all-weather roads, to build walls where they're necessary, or structures. It's to invest in technology. It's to provide more personnel to secure the border. Not to harm these folks, but to help them, to actually protect people in the border states, but also send a very clear message: don't try to come to this country illegally, where your claim for asylum is more likely than not going to be rejected, and the likelihood that you and your children could be hurt is very high. So there is a crisis at the border. We need to fund the President's priorities. The President's immediate priorities require $5.7 billion to fully fund his 10 key priorities at the border. I support that. I applaud the President for taking the step that he did, and I'm going to do everything I can to continue to come down here and send the message to those who may be contemplating making the dangerous trip from whatever country they may be living in with their children and potentially being harmed, to not do that. Let's find another way to help them in their country of origin. Let's find another way to let them request asylum that doesn't involve them making the dangerous trip and then potentially being denied. But I also wanted to come to the floor today to send a very clear message to the President, to the administration. I support the border plan. I support funding the wall, people, technology, and infrastructure proposals that the President have made. We've just got to do it in a sustainable way, and we've got to do it in a way that goes far beyond the $5.7 billion that we need right now to fund the President's immediate priorities. I want to end just by thanking Senator Cornyn. Senator Cornyn said something yesterday that I think was extremely important. It's interesting how somebody who's in a state, maybe in New England or far, far away from the border, to say there's no crisis. We don't have an issue down at the border. And I've got to believe that for somebody like Senator Cornyn, who knows this issue, knows the threat, knows the impact, knows the human toll better than just about any of us, to say, hey, why don't you come down there and spend some time with me? Why don't you do what so many others have done to see it firsthand? And now let's get out of the politics and saying it's a manufactured crisis that the President's acting to. It's a real crisis. Human lives are at stake. So many lives have been lost. We have to stop the carnage, get the politics out of it, secure the border, and move on to immigration reform and so many other things that we should do. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. And again, I just want to thank Senator Cornyn for all the great work that he's done on this issue and the leadership. And I'm glad to follow him into any issue that will hopefully get us to secure this border. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.